At 37,000 feet, Flight 2547 became a metal coffin. The sudden bang from the rear galley was only the beginning. As oxygen masks dangled and the aircraft pitched violently, passengers screamed while both pilots slumped in their seats, victims of a catastrophic pressurization failure. Amidst the chaos, Catherine Reeves remained eerily calm. 10 years since she'd sworn never to fly again, the former test pilot unclipped her seatbelt and moved against the tilting floor toward the cockpit. The plane was dying, just like her squadron had years ago. She recognized the signs. Could she save 211 souls when she couldn't even save herself from the nightmares that haunted her? What dark secret made her abandon the skies she once loved? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Catherine Reeves gripped her armrest as the last call for Flight 2547 echoed through Chicago O'Hare's Terminal 3. At 56, she had the posture of someone who once commanded respect in the air. Now, she wore that former life like a phantom limb, gone, but still aching. "Everything all right, ma'am?" The gate agent's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Deadline pressure." Catherine nodded and handed over her boarding pass. Her fingers brushed against the faded pilot's license tucked in her wallet, a relic she couldn't bring herself to discard even after a decade grounded. The jetway stretched before her like a gullet. Each step toward the aircraft door intensified the familiar cocktail of shame and fear churning in her stomach. The Boeing 737 MAX 10 waited, its hull gleaming under the morning sun. Once, she would have admired its sleek design, its engineering marvels. Now she saw only variables, failure points, and statistical inevitabilities. Flight attendant Maya Chun greeted passengers with practiced efficiency. Early 20s, crisp uniform, eyes sharp and observant. "Welcome aboard," she said to Catherine, noticing how the older woman's gaze darted to the cockpit door, the overhead panels, the exit rows. "Thank you," Catherine murmured, sliding past. Seat 14A. Window. Catherine had chosen it deliberately. Aerospace engineers don't forget how to read a plane, even when they refuse to fly in them. She settled in, noting the subtle vibration of the auxiliary power unit, categorizing it automatically as normal operation. A white-haired gentleman with kind eyes lowered himself into 14B. "Elias Winters," he offered with a firm handshake. "Retired surgeon." "Catherine Reeves." "Engineer?" he asked, noticing the technical journal peeking from her bag. "Aerospace." She didn't elaborate. Dr. Winters smiled. "I always find it peculiar when those who design aircraft seem nervous to fly in them." Catherine's fingers closed around the small pill bottle in her pocket. She hadn't taken one. Wouldn't. She'd promised Emma she'd be clear-headed this time. "It's complicated." Through the window, Catherine watched the ground crew. A maintenance worker was gesturing animatedly to a supervisor, pointing at something near the rear cargo hold. Her eyes narrowed. The worker's body language spoke of confrontation, not routine. "First time to Seattle?" Dr. Winters attempted conversation again. "No," Catherine replied, then softened. It wasn't his fault she was a poor traveling companion. "My daughter's graduating from medical school tomorrow." "You must be proud." "We haven't spoken in 3 years." The confession surprised her. Perhaps 30 years of keeping secrets had finally worn thin. The businessman across the aisle barked into his phone about quarterly projections. Behind her, a young mother attempted to settle twin toddlers. A college student with noise-canceling headphones. A nervous first-time flyer clutching a travel pillow. Ordinary people with ordinary reasons to be airborne. Catherine's phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "Don't bother coming if you can't stay sober." She stared at the message, thumbs hovering over the screen. No response would suffice. Nothing could bridge the chasm of those final days when she'd spiraled downward, when the nightmares of burning aircraft and screaming test pilots had driven her to the bottle. The cabin door closed with a hydraulic sigh. Captain James Porter's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 2547 to Seattle. We're expecting a smooth ride today, though we might encounter some turbulence as we approach the Rockies." Catherine closed her eyes, her engineer's mind involuntarily calculating thrust requirements, fuel consumption, and optimal climb rates. She'd forgotten nothing. That was the problem. The aircraft began to push back from the gate, and with it came the familiar, terrible sensation, not of movement, but of surrender to forces beyond her control. The engine spooled up with a familiar whine that sent Catherine's mind hurtling backward through time. Her fingers found the dog-eared photograph in her jacket pocket, 5 faces grinning beneath desert sun, flight suits crisp, arms linked in camaraderie. Test Squadron 41. Now she was the only one whose face hadn't been carved onto a memorial stone. In the cockpit, Captain James Porter ran through the pre-takeoff checklist with methodical precision. At 53, he'd logged over 20,000 hours and had the calm demeanor of a man who'd seen everything the skies could throw at him. Beside him, First Officer Darren Williams, 34, ambitious and technically gifted, responded with practiced efficiency. Weather radar showing that system moving north, Williams noted. Should miss it entirely. Let's hope so, Porter replied, making a minor adjustment to their programmed route. Chicago Center's been complaining about their equipment all morning. Catherine felt the subtle shift as the aircraft aligned with runway 28R. The thrust levers advanced, and the familiar press of acceleration pushed her against her seat. Her hands instinctively mimicked the control inputs. Rotate at 153 knots, positive rate, gear up. You've flown before, Dr. Winters observed quietly. Not as a passenger, I mean. Catherine opened her eyes, unaware she'd closed them. Another lifetime. The wheels left Illinois soil, and the aircraft banked gently westward. Catherine noted the slight asymmetry in the turn. Minor, within tolerances, but perceptible to someone who had once coaxed experimental aircraft through maneuvers that defied conventional aerodynamics. 10 years ago, I flew the X-49 Peregrine, she found herself saying. Mach 2.7 capable, thrust vectoring technology that would make this aircraft feel like a freight train. Memory ambushed her, the desert stretching below, the stratosphere above, her squadron leader's voice crackling through the helmet comm. Reeves, you're pushing the envelope again. Pride in his voice, not censure. Before everything went. Maya passed through the cabin, checking seatbelts. Her gaze lingered on Catherine. First time flying with us? First time flying in a decade, Catherine admitted. Maya's professional smile faltered briefly with genuine curiosity. Well, welcome back to the skies. As the flight attendant moved on, Catherine's phone buzzed again. Another text from Emma. Mom, the ceremony starts at 10. Don't make a scene. Dr. Winters doesn't need to know we haven't spoken. Catherine flinched. Dr. Winters pretended not to notice, focusing instead on the in-flight magazine. The last time Catherine had seen Emma, her daughter had been shouting through a locked bathroom door, begging her mother to come out, to stop drinking, to explain why the nightmares had gotten so bad. Catherine had never told her about the test flight, about the catastrophic system's failure, about the 3 pilots who'd trusted her designs and paid with their lives. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers began moving about the cabin. The businessman immediately pulled out his laptop. The twins behind her giggled at a tablet game. Routine life at 30,000 feet. In the cockpit, Porter frowned at an indicator. Cabin pressure variance looks off by 0.2. Williams checked his instruments. Within limits. Could be a sensor issue. Flag it for maintenance in Seattle. Porter made a note in the electronic log. Run the high-altitude checklist again, would you? Catherine remained seated, eyes closed, breathing measured. The subtle changes in engine pitch, the minute adjustments in attitude, the barely perceptible fluctuations in cabin pressure, all spoke to her in a language she'd never forgotten. An aircraft in perfect health had a distinct symphony. Flight 2547 was playing slightly out of tune. The small pill bottle in Catherine's pocket seemed to grow heavier as the aircraft leveled at cruise altitude. 30 milligrams of diazepam, a chemical shield against the memories and fear. She hadn't taken one in 6 months. The bottle remained full, a talisman of sorts. A reminder that she could choose clarity over comfort. Mind if I ask what kind of engineer you are, specifically? Dr. Winters inquired as the beverage service began. Catherine pulled out her tablet, displaying complex schematics. Pressurization systems, primarily. Cabin environmental control. Ah, so you're the one who keeps us breathing. His smile was genuine. Essential work. It was, she replied, her finger tracing the outline of an outflow valve. I left active design 5 years ago. I consult and teach now. In the cockpit, Porter frowned at the environmental control panel. That's odd. Outflow valve position indicator is fluctuating. Williams leaned over to check. Still within parameters, but I don't like it. Want me to run a diagnostic? Please do. Porter keyed the intercom. Cabin crew, this is the captain. How's our pressure feeling back there? Maya's voice came through. Everything seems normal, Captain. Passengers comfortable. Catherine felt the subtle change before any instrument would register it. A faint pressure behind her eardrums, the kind test pilots develop sensitivity to. She glanced at the overhead panel, noting the position of the airflow nozzles. Something wasn't quite right. You have a good eye, Dr. Winters observed, following her gaze. Always diagnosing, aren't we? Doctors look for symptoms, engineers look for failures. Occupational hazard, Catherine admitted. We're trained to see catastrophe in minor anomalies. Must make it difficult to relax. You have no idea. Catherine opened her email, attempting to distract herself with work correspondence. A message from her department chair. Reeves, the Defense Department called again about the X-49 files. Legal says we need to comply this time. Her throat tightened. 10 years, and still the Pentagon wanted answers about what had gone wrong that day. Maya stopped by with the beverage cart. Anything to drink? Just water, please. Catherine accepted the plastic cup, deliberately avoiding the tiny bottles of liquor on display. You fly often? Maya asked, a hint of recognition in her eyes as she handed Catherine the water. Used to. Understanding dawned on Maya's face. You were a pilot. Catherine nodded. A lifetime ago. Commercial. Military. Test program. Maya's eyes widened slightly. That's incredible. I'm actually applying to flight school next year. For a moment, Catherine saw herself at 22, eager, fearless, certain the sky held no limits. Before she understood how quickly altitude could become a coffin. It's a good life, Catherine said softly. Just remember, the aircraft always tells you when something's wrong. The trick is learning to listen. Maya seemed about to ask more when the beverage cart bumped slightly as the aircraft encountered light turbulence. Catherine's hand instinctively gripped the armrest. Not from fear, but from the sudden awareness of a subtle harmonic shift in the airframe. She'd felt it before, in simulation chambers when they tested catastrophic pressure hull breaches. Her eyes moved to the windows, checking for the telltale signs of stress. Nothing visible yet, but her instincts were screaming. Are you all right? Dr. Winters asked. Something's not right with this aircraft, she murmured. The turbulence? No. Catherine ran her fingers along the window frame. It's the pressure differential. It's fluctuating. In the cockpit, an amber caution light illuminated on the environmental panel. Outflow valve showing anomalous readings, Williams reported. Could be a sensor malfunction. Porter nodded. Let's descend to 35,000 as a precaution. Tell ATC we're experiencing minor pressurization irregularities. Catherine closed her eyes, listening to the aircraft. Under the facade of normal operation, she could hear it now, the whisper of warning, the prelude to catastrophe. The first noticeable jolt came 20 minutes later. Not the gentle roll of ordinary turbulence, but a shudder that ran through the airframe like a warning. Catherine's eyes snapped to the cabin pressure monitor displayed on her seatback screen, a digital readout most passengers ignored in favor of movies or flight tracking. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has illuminated the fasten seatbelt sign, Maya announced over the PA system. We're expecting some turbulence as we navigate around a weather system. Please return to your seats. In the cockpit, Porter and Williams exchanged concerned glances as warning indicators multiplied across their displays. Cabin altitude showing 9,000 feet, Williams reported. That's a 1,000-foot variance from what it should be. Porter keyed his radio. Chicago Center, American 2547, requesting immediate descent to 31,000 due to pressurization anomaly. The controller's voice crackled back. American 2547, descent approved. 31,000. As the aircraft began its descent, Catherine felt the distinct pressure change in her sinuses. She checked her watch. The rate of cabin altitude increase was accelerating beyond normal parameters. "You feel that?" she asked Dr. Winters. He nodded, rubbing his ears. "Pressure change. Faster than usual." The businessman across the aisle looked up irritably from his laptop. "What's with the ears popping? Can't they control the pressure in these things?" Catherine studied the outflow valve indicators on her monitor. The primary valve was showing erratic movements, opening too wide, then barely closing in time. The backup systems should have engaged already. Another shudder rippled through the aircraft. The mother with twins 2 rows back soothed her suddenly crying children. "Dr. Winters," Catherine said quietly, "what do you know about hypoxia symptoms?" His eyes sharpened. "Quite a bit. Trauma medicine involves managing oxygen deprivation." "Why?" "Because I think we're about to experience a pressurization failure." He studied her face. "You're serious?" "The outflow valves are malfunctioning. The cabin altitude is climbing when it should be stable. And listen," she tilted her head toward the ceiling. The subtle hiss of the air conditioning system had changed its tenor. To most passengers, the difference would be imperceptible. To Catherine, it screamed danger. Maya hurried past, her professional calm betrayed by the tension around her eyes. Catherine reached out, catching her sleeve. "The pilots know about the pressurization issue?" she asked. Maya hesitated, surprised. "Yes, they're addressing it. We're descending to a lower altitude as a precaution." "It's more than a precaution," Catherine said. "The primary outflow valve is failing. Tell them to check the auxiliary power unit. I think it might be affecting the backup systems." Maya's eyes widened. "How do you?" "I designed similar systems. Please, tell them." As Maya rushed toward the cockpit phone, Williams was already reporting the next failure. "APU electrical output fluctuating," he announced to Porter. "Backup pressurization control switching to battery power." Porter began the emergency checklist procedures. "Get ready for a rapid descent if this gets worse." Catherine closed her eyes, calculating time against altitude. If the outflow valve failed completely at their current position, they'd have less than 3 minutes before hypoxia began affecting cognitive functions. She opened her tablet and pulled up the aircraft schematics she kept for consulting work. The 737 MAX 10 outflow valve system had redundancies, but if the APU was compromised, the cabin lights flickered once. "What was that?" the nervous first-time flyer behind her whispered to his companion. Catherine felt cold certainty settle in her stomach. She'd seen this cascade before, in simulation and once in horrifying reality. System failures propagating through supposedly isolated circuits. The fasten seatbelt chimes sounded again, followed by Porter's voice. "Flight attendants, prepare for possible emergency descent." Maya returned, her face pale. "They're checking the APU." "How did you know?" "Because I've seen this failure pattern before," Catherine said, then looked up sharply as the cabin pressure warning indicator on her screen suddenly flashed red. "And we're out of time." The sudden bang from the rear galley was like a gunshot. Chaos erupted instantly. The pressurization outflow valve had catastrophically failed, causing explosive decompression. Yellow oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments, swinging like macabre pendulums as the aircraft lurched violently. "Masks! Masks on now!" Catherine shouted, pulling her own mask over her face with practiced movements. The elastic strap caught in her hair, but she ignored the pain, focusing instead on securing the flow of oxygen. Dr. Winters followed her lead, his medical training evident in his efficient movements. Around them, passengers fumbled with unfamiliar equipment, some frozen in panic, others struggling against the sudden rush of adrenaline that made fine motor control difficult. In the cockpit, Porter and Williams fought their own battle. The sudden decompression had triggered multiple system failures. The autopilot disengaged as the aircraft began a sharp, uncommanded descent. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," Porter called into his radio, his voice muffled by his oxygen mask. American 2547, experiencing rapid decompression, executing emergency descent. Williams struggled to stabilize the aircraft, fighting the control column as warning klaxons blared around them. Losing primary hydraulics, he reported, voice tense. Porter pulled his attention away from the radio to check the instrument panel. The altimeter was unwinding rapidly as they descended through 34,000 feet. Too many warning lights illuminated across the panel. He reached for the captain's headset to communicate with the cabin, but his movements became uncoordinated, his vision tunneling. "Oxygen," he managed, before slumping forward against his harness. Williams turned to help, but his own oxygen mask had been damaged in the initial chaos. He fumbled with the emergency bottle, his movements growing sluggish as hypoxia took hold. "Control." His words slurred as consciousness fled. In the cabin, Catherine counted seconds. 30 seconds of useful consciousness at this altitude without supplemental oxygen. She looked around, assessing the situation through the thin plastic of her mask. Most passengers had managed to secure their masks, but the mother with twins was struggling, attempting to place masks on her children before herself. Catherine knew the safety briefing by heart, secure your own mask before helping others, but she also understood the primal instinct of a mother trying to protect her children. The businessman who had been so irritable earlier was now pale with fear, clutching his armrest with white knuckles. The nervous first-time flyer behind Catherine had passed out before securing his mask properly. "Help him," Catherine directed Dr. Winters, pointing to the unconscious passenger. The doctor nodded, releasing his seatbelt to assist. The aircraft lurched again, dropping several hundred feet in seconds. The violent negative G-forces sent unsecured items flying toward the ceiling. A laptop computer shattered against an overhead bin. A flight attendant at the rear of the cabin fell, striking her head against a seat back. Catherine's eyes moved to the cockpit door. Through the small window she could see movement, or lack thereof. The backs of the pilots' heads were visible, but neither was moving to control the rapidly descending aircraft. Maya stumbled down the aisle, her own oxygen mask in place but her eyes wide with panic. She grabbed seat backs for stability as the plane bucked and shuddered. "The pilots," Catherine called. Through her mask, gesturing toward the cockpit. "Check the pilots." Maya nodded and fought her way forward, using the seats to brace against the violent motion of the aircraft. She reached the cockpit door and peered through the window. Her body language shifted instantly from determination to horror. Catherine unbuckled her seatbelt. Decades of training screamed at her to stay seated and secure, but deeper instincts, the ones that had made her an exceptional test pilot, overrode caution. "Watch my seat," she told Dr. Winters, who had just finished securing the unconscious passenger's mask. "Where are you going?" he called after her. "To the cockpit," Catherine replied, gripping seatbacks as she moved forward against the steep dive angle. "Someone has to fly this plane." The aircraft rolled unexpectedly to the left. Catherine stumbled but maintained her balance. As she approached the cockpit door, Maya turned to her, terror evident in her eyes. "They're not moving," the flight attendant said through her mask. "Both of them, they're not responding." The cockpit door stood before Catherine like a threshold between past and future, between civilian and commander, between running from her ghosts and confronting them. Maya fumbled with her keys, hands shaking beneath her oxygen mask. "Security protocols," Maya explained, struggling with the lock. "After September 11th. "I know." Catherine's voice was steady despite the oxygen mask. "I flew military transports during the changeover." The aircraft pitched violently again. Through the cockpit window, Catherine could see Porter slumped forward, Williams collapsed against the side window. Their oxygen masks were in place, but they'd likely lost consciousness before securing them properly. "Got it." Maya turned the key and punched in the code. The door swung open. The cockpit, once a sanctuary of order and control, was now a tableau of disaster. Warning lights illuminated every panel. Alarms blared. The control column jerked erratically as the aircraft's systems fought conflicting inputs. Catherine moved to Porter first, checking his pulse. He's alive. Severe hypoxia. She shifted him gently in the seat, adjusting his oxygen mask to ensure proper flow. Williams showed similar symptoms. Both men were breathing, but deeply unconscious. They need medical attention, Catherine told Maya. Get Dr. Winters. Tell him hypoxia, possible cerebral edema. Maya hesitated at the threshold. Who's going to fly the plane? Catherine settled into the captain's seat, her hands moving instinctively to the controls. I am. But 20 years as an Air Force test pilot, 10 as an aerospace engineer specializing in high-altitude systems. Catherine looked up, her eyes meeting Maya's through their oxygen masks. Watch and learn. Maya nodded and disappeared back into the cabin. Catherine assessed the situation quickly. The aircraft was in a steep descent, passing through 28,000 feet. Primary electrical systems compromised. One hydraulic system failing. Engine 2 showing abnormal readings. The autopilot had disengaged during the decompression. She took manual control, feeling the familiar resistance of the control column. Like riding a bicycle, the muscle memory returned instantly. She stabilized the descent, adjusting the pitch to maintain a controlled emergency descent rate. The radio crackled. American 2547, Chicago Center. We show you descending rapidly. Do you declare an emergency? Catherine reached for the captain's headset, which had fallen to the floor. She put it on over her oxygen mask. Chicago Center, American 2547. This is... She hesitated for a split second. This is Catherine Reeves, former Air Force test pilot. Both pilots are incapacitated due to rapid decompression. I have control of the aircraft. Declaring an emergency and continuing emergency descent to 10,000 feet. A moment of stunned silence, then, American 2547, Roger your emergency. Descend and maintain 10,000. All traffic is being cleared from your path. Report when able your intentions and assistance required. Wilco Center. Catherine scanned the instruments again. The backup electrical system was engaged, but numerous systems showed anomalies. The cabin pressure indicator was pegged at maximum differential. The cabin was effectively at the same pressure as the outside air. Maya returned with Dr. Winters, who immediately began examining the unconscious pilots. Hypoxia, he confirmed. They need supplemental oxygen and lower altitude immediately. Working on it, Catherine replied, her focus absolute as she continued the controlled descent. The aircraft passed through 22,000 feet, the air gradually thickening outside. Dr. Winters looked up from his examination. You're flying this plane? For now. Catherine adjusted the trim, compensating for the aircraft's tendency to pitch up as they encountered denser air. I flew the test models for the core avionics on this aircraft family. The passengers? Terrified but mostly conscious, Maya reported. The masks are working for most of them. Catherine nodded. At 10,000 feet we can take off the masks. The emergency oxygen only lasts about 12 minutes. She studied the engine readouts with growing concern. Engine 2's parameters were fluctuating wildly, oil pressure dropping, temperature rising. We've got another problem, she said, pointing to the display. Engine 2 is failing. Possibly damaged during the decompression event. As if responding to her diagnosis, a new warning light illuminated on the panel. Engine 2 fire. Maya, Catherine said, her voice calm despite the escalating crisis, I need you to be my co-pilot. Can you do that? The young flight attendant straightened her shoulders. Yes. But because we've got a long way to Seattle and we just lost half our thrust. Catherine's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she reached for the engine fire handle, its protective guard already flipped open. Engine fire checklist, she said to Maya, who stood wide-eyed beside her. I need you to read it to me. Maya fumbled with the emergency checklist binder, finding the tabbed section. Her voice wavered but steadied as she read, Engine fire or severe damage, Step 1, autothrottle. Off, Catherine confirmed, disengaging the system. Thrust lever. Idle. Catherine pulled back the right thrust lever. They worked through the procedure methodically. Catherine pulled the fire handle, cutting off fuel, hydraulic fluid, and electricity to the affected engine. The decision was irreversible. Engine 2 would remain shut down for the remainder of the flight. Fire extinguisher switch to the right, then wait 30 seconds, Maya read. Catherine complied, mentally counting down while maintaining their controlled descent with her left hand on the control column. The aircraft shuddered as the asymmetric thrust created yaw forces that she countered with rudder input. Fire indication? Maya asked, following the checklist. Catherine checked the warning light. Still illuminated. Activating second extinguisher bottle. She rotated the switch left, deploying the remaining fire suppressant. 10 seconds later, the fire warning light extinguished. Fire's out, Catherine announced, both to the cockpit and to Chicago Center. American 2547, Roger, your engine fire extinguished, the controller responded. Descent looks good. Passing 15,000 feet. Dr. Winters had moved the unconscious pilots to the cabin, where he could better attend to them with the help of another passenger who identified herself as a nurse. He returned to the cockpit doorway. Both stabilized. Responding to supplemental oxygen. The captains showing signs of regaining consciousness. Good, Catherine replied, her focus on the airspeed indicator as they passed through 12,000 feet. In the main cabin, passengers white-knuckled their armrests as the steep descent continued. The businessman who had been so absorbed in his work now led others in prayer. The mother with twins sang softly to her children, a lullaby incongruous with their emergency descent. The aircraft leveled at 10,000 feet, and Catherine felt the immediate relief of denser air. The emergency oxygen masks had a limited supply, typically 10 to 15 minutes, but they'd reached breathable altitude with time to spare. Ladies and gentlemen, Maya announced over the PA system, her training reasserting itself. We've leveled at 10,000 feet where the air is breathable. You may remove your oxygen masks, but please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. A collective exhalation passed through the cabin as masks came off. Questions erupted immediately. The businessman rose from his seat, demanding answers. Sir, please remain seated. Maya's voice came firmly over the PA. We've experienced a decompression event and engine failure. We have a qualified pilot at the controls and are diverting for an emergency landing. Catherine used the moment to assess their situation. The aircraft was stable at 10,000 feet, maintaining approximately 250 knots on a single engine. The primary flight displays functioned, but numerous secondary systems showed fault indications. She pulled up the navigation display, calculating fuel consumption against their position. With one engine, their range was significantly reduced. Seattle was out of the question. Chicago Center, American 2547, she radioed. Request vectors to nearest suitable airport for B-737 emergency landing. One engine inoperative, pressurization lost, both pilots incapacitated. American 2547, nearest suitable field is Minneapolis-St. Paul International, approximately 200 miles on your heading of 270. Stand by for vectors and approach information. The emergency checklist manual lay open on the center console, its laminated pages containing the procedures that stood between survival and disaster. Catherine had memorized most of them during her years of training, but she took nothing for granted now. Maya, I need you to make an announcement. Tell the passengers we're diverting to Minneapolis, estimated time 30 minutes. As Maya returned to the cabin, Catherine examined the engine instruments more carefully. Engine 1 was performing well but showing signs of strain compensating for the lost thrust. The aircraft gave a sudden shudder, and a new caution light illuminated. Hydraulic pressure SysB. Of course, Catherine muttered, reaching for the hydraulic system checklist. It couldn't be simple, could it? Through the cockpit window, the horizon stretched clear and blue, deceptively serene. But between their current position and the Minneapolis runway lay a complex sequence of failures that would test Catherine's abilities to their limits. She rolled her shoulders, feeling the familiar tension of command settling across them. One problem at a time, she whispered to herself. Just like the old days. The electrical system's warning light blinked on, joining the constellation of illuminated cautions and warnings across the instrument panel. Catherine studied the overhead electrical panel, tracing the flow of power through the aircraft's complex systems. "Loss of generator 2, she muttered, reaching up to adjust switches. "Expected with the engine shut down, but we're drawing too much from generator 1. The airspeed indicator fluctuated momentarily, then stabilized. Other instruments flickered. Catherine made a decision. "We need to deploy the RAT. "The what?" Maya asked, returning to the cockpit. "Ram air turbine," Catherine explained, reaching for the manual deployment handle. "Emergency power generator. Uses airflow to generate electricity and hydraulic pressure." She pulled the handle. A subtle vibration ran through the airframe as the small propeller deployed into the slipstream, spinning rapidly in the relative wind. "In flight test, we called this the oh shit handle," Catherine said with the ghost of a smile. "Last line of defense when everything else fails." Memory flashed unbidden. Catherine at 28, flying the experimental X-49 through a system failure scenario in the Nevada desert. Her instructor's voice calm in her headset. "Reeves, you have a gift for keeping aircraft flying when they should be falling. Don't waste it." The RAT provided enough power to stabilize the essential systems. Primary flight displays brightened, and the hydraulic pressure gauge for System B rose slightly. "Minneapolis Center, American 2547, Catherine radioed, having been handed off from Chicago Control. "We've deployed the RAT due to electrical system degradation. Maintaining 10,000 feet, heading 270. American 2547, Minneapolis Center. We're tracking you on radar. All approach traffic is being diverted. Emergency equipment will be standing by. Be advised we're showing weather moving into the Minneapolis area from the northwest." Catherine checked the weather radar, which flickered but displayed a significant storm system. Request vectors around the weather. As Minneapolis Center provided new headings, Maya leaned closer. "I noticed something when I was in the cabin. The decompression damage, it looks strange." Catherine glanced at her. "Strange how?" "It's not just the rear galley. There's damage near the rear cargo hold access panel. Looks deliberate." Catherine's suspicions crystallized. The unusual maintenance activity she'd observed in Chicago. The cargo door irregularity. The catastrophic nature of the failure. "Sabotage," she said quietly. Maya's eyes widened. "You think someone did this on purpose?" "I think we need to check what's in the cargo hold." Catherine tapped the aircraft manifest screen. "See if you can pull up the cargo manifest." As Maya worked the screen, Dr. Winters appeared at the cockpit door. "Captain Porter is conscious but disoriented. Williams is still out. Several passengers need medical attention, headaches, nausea, one possible ruptured eardrum. Anything you can do for them? Basic first aid. The mother with twins is helping. She's a pediatric nurse." Catherine nodded. "We're 30 minutes from Minneapolis. Can you hold the fort until then?" "I'll manage," he assured her, studying her with newfound respect. "You seem to know exactly what you're doing." "I've crashed better planes than this," Catherine replied, then grimaced. "That came out wrong." Dr. Winters actually laughed. "Reassuring bedside manner wasn't part of your training, I take it?" "I usually flew alone." Maya looked up from the manifest. "There's a diplomatic pouch listed. High-priority secure transport from Chicago to Seattle." Catherine frowned. "Diplomatic from where?" "Doesn't say. Just diplomat, secure, priority." Another memory surfaced, Catherine's final test flight program, developing aircraft for specialized government agencies. Agencies that didn't officially exist. Agencies whose secrets were worth killing for. The aircraft shuddered as they encountered the leading edge of the weather system. Rain began streaking across the windscreen. "Minneapolis Center, American 2547. Request updated weather for approach." American 2547, Minneapolis reporting ceiling 800 feet, visibility 2 miles in heavy rain, winds 320 at 25 gusting 35. Catherine did rapid mental calculations. With one engine, partial hydraulics, and degraded electrical systems, they faced a difficult approach in deteriorating weather conditions. The aircraft lurched suddenly to the right. Catherine countered with aileron and rudder, feeling an unusual resistance in the controls. "What was that?" Maya asked. "Flight control anomaly." Catherine tested the controls carefully. The left inboard slat is stuck partially extended, creating asymmetric lift. She scanned the illuminated warnings on the panel, connecting dots between seemingly disparate failures. "This wasn't random," she said with growing certainty. "The pressurization failure, the engine, the electrical system. Someone wanted this aircraft to crash, and they wanted it to look like an accident." Maya's face paled. "Why?" Catherine glanced at the cargo manifest again. "I think it's about what's in that diplomatic pouch. And I think whoever planned this didn't expect someone on board who could keep flying after their cascade of failures." "You." "Me." Catherine adjusted their heading, banking carefully around a building thunderhead. "And they've just made this very personal." The storm intensified around them, violent cells of turbulence rocking the aircraft. Catherine fought the controls, compensating for the stuck slat and the single-engine asymmetric thrust. Rain lashed the windscreen in horizontal sheets. The weather radar display flickered between static and ominous red and yellow storm cells directly in their path. "Minneapolis Center, American 2547. Request deviation 20 degrees left for weather," Catherine called, her voice steady despite the aircraft's violent motion. "American 2547, deviation approved. All traffic is cleared from your path." As Catherine banked the aircraft, another memory clawed its way to the surface, the test flight that had ended her career. Not just a flight, but a nightmare that had pursued her into sobriety and back into the bottle more times than she could count. February 14, 2015. Valentine's Day. The X-49 Peregrine prototype, designed for operations beyond the edge of the atmosphere. Catherine had been the lead systems engineer, responsible for the life support and pressurization systems. Her signature had approved the final design. The aircraft bucked violently, snapping her back to the present. Maya gripped the edge of the co-pilot seat, her knuckles white. "Are we going to make it through this?" the flight attendant asked. "I've flown through worse," Catherine replied, though in truth the combination of the damaged aircraft and severe weather pushed the limits of what was survivable. "There's a technique to it. You have to feel what the aircraft wants to do, work with the turbulence rather than fighting it." She demonstrated, allowing the aircraft to rise slightly with an updraft before gently correcting. The bouncing smoothed marginally. "Like dancing," Maya observed. "A very uncooperative partner," Catherine said with a tight smile, "but yes." The radio crackled with an update from Minneapolis Center, but static obscured parts of the transmission. The storm was affecting radio communications. "American 2547, say again," Catherine requested. "Approach unavailable due to more static. Divert to Rochester International." Catherine checked the navigation display. Rochester was 50 miles southeast of Minneapolis, potentially clear of the worst weather. "Minneapolis Center, confirm divert to Rochester?" "Affirmative, 2547. Rochester reporting better conditions. Ceiling 1,500, visibility 5 miles, winds 290 at 15. Catherine made a rapid assessment. The additional distance would stretch their fuel reserves, but the improved landing conditions might make the difference between survival and disaster. "Diverting to Rochester," she confirmed, banking the aircraft again. Dr. Winters appeared at the cockpit door. "Porter's more alert now. Asking about the situation." "Tell him we're handling it," Catherine replied, her attention divided between the flight instruments and the storm-tossed sky outside. "How's Williams?" "Still unconscious, but stable. Several passengers showing delayed hypoxia symptoms." A flash of lightning illuminated the cockpit, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The aircraft lurched violently to the right. "Static discharge," Catherine explained to Maya's terrified expression. "Close, but it didn't hit us." The next bolt wasn't so forgiving. A brilliant white flash engulfed the aircraft, and simultaneously, multiple systems failed. The primary flight display went black, then rebooted showing limited information. The weather radar display died completely. Lightning strike, Catherine reported to Minneapolis Center, methodically checking systems. We've lost weather radar and some avionics. Static was the only response. Radio's compromised, she muttered, switching frequencies to try again. The test flight memories surged back with the crisis. 3 test pilots in the X-49 prototype, climbing through 70,000 feet when the pressurization system failed catastrophically. Unlike today's controlled emergency descent, they'd been too high, the margins too slim. By the time the aircraft had reached breathable altitude, all 3 pilots were brain-dead from hypoxia. The investigation had centered on Catherine's design. "You okay?" Maya asked, noticing Catherine's momentary distraction. "Fine," Catherine replied automatically, forcing the memories back into their compartment. "We need to navigate visually now." Through the rain-streaked windscreen, looking for breaks in the cloud cover. The aircraft continued to buck and roll in the turbulence, but Catherine's hands remained steady on the controls, making continuous small adjustments. "Your daughter," Maya said suddenly. "You mentioned she's in Seattle?" "Medical school graduation. Tomorrow." Catherine checked the fuel gauges. "Looks like I'll be missing it. Again." "She'll understand when she hears what happened." Catherine's laugh held no humor. "You don't know Emma. Or what happened between us." Another violent jolt interrupted them. Warning indicators showed the hydraulic pressure dropping again. The aircraft was continuing its slow deterioration, systems failing incrementally as they fought through the storm. "There," Catherine said suddenly, pointing to a break in the clouds. "That's our path out." She banked toward the opening, seeking the clear air beyond the storm front. Catherine's phone buzzed in her pocket as they emerged from the worst of the storm cell. 3 messages from Emma. She couldn't check them now, but their presence weighed on her. Another system failure, personal rather than mechanical. "Rochester approach, American 2547, Catherine called, having finally established contact with the airport. "Single engine, partial hydraulics, flight control issues, electrical system degradation. Request priority landing runway 31. American 2547, Rochester approach. Cleared direct Hefney intersection for ILS runway 31. Descend pilot's discretion to 4000. Emergency equipment standing by." As Catherine programmed the approach into the partially functioning flight management system, more warning lights illuminated across the panel. Hydraulic pressure Sys-A joined its B counterpart in glowing amber. "That's not good," Maya observed. "Understatement," Catherine replied, hands moving to the overhead panel to reconfigure the hydraulic pumps. "We're losing primary hydraulics for the control surfaces." She felt the flight controls growing heavier, less responsive. The Boeing 737's mechanical backup systems would allow continued flight, but with significantly degraded handling characteristics. Dr. Winters returned. "The businessman is causing problems. Demanding to know who's flying the plane." Catherine didn't look up from the instruments. "Tell him it's the ghost of Amelia Earhart." I tried humor. "He's insisting on speaking to the person in charge." "I'm a little busy keeping us alive," Catherine replied, then sighed. "Fine. Let him come forward." Briefly. Moments later, the businessman appeared behind Dr. Winters. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face pale but composed. "Richard Thornton, Aerospace Defense Systems," he introduced himself. "I understand you've taken command of this aircraft?" Catherine spared him a glance. "Catherine Reeves. Former Air Force test pilot. Current aerospace engineer trying to land this compromised aircraft." Recognition flickered across his face. "Catherine Reeves? X-49 program." She stiffened. "What do you know about that?" "I was on the review board after the incident. Your design wasn't at fault. We found evidence of tampering, but it was classified." The control yoke bucked in Catherine's hands as another hydraulic pressure drop affected the ailerons. She fought the aircraft level before responding. "Tampering? They told me metal fatigue. Design failure." Her voice was controlled but tight with suppressed emotion. "It was sabotage, Dr. Reeves." But certain agencies preferred a technical explanation over admitting a security breach. He looked pointedly at the cargo manifest still displayed on the screen. Similar to what I suspect happened here. Mr. Thornton, Catherine said, I need to focus on flying this aircraft. We can discuss government conspiracies after we're safely on the ground. Of course. He seemed about to leave, then hesitated. For what it's worth, those of us who knew the truth fought to clear your name. The record was amended 2 years ago. Catherine's jaw tightened. 2 years I'll never get back. Now please return to your seat. As Thornton departed, Maya looked at Catherine. What was that about? Ancient history, Catherine muttered, though her mind raced with implications. Sabotage. Not her fault. The knowledge came 10 years too late to save her career, her marriage, her relationship with Emma. The aircraft shuddered as they descended through 7,000 feet. The partial electrical failure had knocked out the autothrottle system, requiring Catherine to manually control engine thrust while simultaneously managing the increasingly heavy flight controls. Her phone buzzed again. Emma was persistent, probably wondering why her mother wasn't responding, unaware that Catherine was currently the only thing keeping 211 people from becoming a statistic. The landing gear indicator panel caught her attention. When she moved the landing gear lever to the down position, only 2 green lights illuminated. The third, the nose gear, remained dark. Great, Catherine muttered. Rochester approach, American 2547. We're showing possible nose gear issues. Request low approach for gear check before landing. American 2547, approved as requested. Emergency vehicles will verify gear status. Catherine looked at Maya. I need you to make an announcement. Tell the passengers we're preparing for landing at Rochester. Have them review brace positions. As Maya returned to the cabin, Catherine ran through mental calculations. Landing with a single engine was challenging but manageable. Landing with degraded hydraulics added complexity. Landing with a potentially collapsed nose gear would be exceptionally dangerous. She'd need to hold the nose off the runway as long as possible after touchdown, allowing speed to bleed off before gently lowering the nose, hoping the gear held. If it collapsed, Catherine pushed the thought aside. One problem at a time. The altimeter unwound through 6,000 feet. The airport was now visible in the distance through breaks in the clouds, a concrete promise of safety if she could just get them there intact. She keyed the intercom. Dr. Winters, please come to the cockpit. When he arrived, she spoke without taking her eyes from the instruments. We may have a rough landing. I need you to secure the pilots as best you can and prepare for potential injuries. How rough are we talking? Catherine's expression was grim. Let's just say I hope you haven't forgotten your trauma medicine. Rochester International Airport appeared through the breaking clouds, a concrete oasis in a sea of farmland. Catherine guided the damaged aircraft in a wide arc, descending through 4,000 feet on approach to runway 31. American 2547, Rochester Tower. Emergency equipment in position. Wind 290 at 12 knots. Cleared to land runway 31. Rochester Tower, 2547. Request low approach for gear check first. Approved, 2547. Emergency vehicles. Standing by for visual inspection. Catherine calculated approach speeds on a paper from the flight manual, making adjustments for their single-engine, damaged slat configuration. Normal approach speed would be approximately 140 knots, but their circumstances were far from normal. We'll come in at 165 knots, she told Maya, who had returned to the cockpit. Higher than standard because of the slat issue. The asymmetric lift means we can't safely fly slower. Maya watched as Catherine wrote the numbers on the approach chart, along with V-speeds and callouts. You're doing all this from memory? You never forget the important things, Catherine replied. Like riding a bicycle. A bicycle with one wheel, damaged spokes, and failed brakes, she didn't add. They descended through 3,000 feet, the aircraft's damaged systems creating a constant struggle against the controls. The hydraulic pressure continued to fluctuate, making the control column increasingly difficult to move. Catherine's forearms burned with the effort of maintaining precise control. "Flaps 5, she commanded, moving the flap lever herself when she remembered Maya wasn't a trained pilot. The aircraft shuddered as the flaps extended, creating more lift but also more drag. Rochester Tower, American 2547 on 5-mile final for low approach. 2547, Roger. Emergency vehicles in position for visual inspection." Catherine focused intensely as they descended through 1,000 feet above the runway. The aircraft wanted to roll to the right due to the stuck slat. She countered with constant left aileron pressure. The single-engine asymmetric thrust pulled them left. She countered with right rudder. The dance of opposing forces required continuous, precise corrections. 500 feet, she announced, using standard callouts despite the unusual circumstances. They leveled at 200 feet above the runway, maintaining 165 knots as they flew the length of the concrete. Below, fire trucks paced them, personnel visually inspecting the landing gear. American 2547, Rochester Tower. Visual inspection confirms nose gear appears down but possibly not locked. Repeat, nose gear down but possibly not locked. Roger that, Tower. Catherine banked away from the runway, beginning a climbing right turn to set up for the actual landing attempt. Just to make things interesting. She keyed the cabin intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Catherine Reeves from the flight deck. We're preparing for landing at Rochester. Our nose landing gear may not be fully locked, so we're taking extra precautions. Please review the brace position in your safety card and follow all crew instructions." As the aircraft climbed back to pattern altitude, Catherine ran through her options. A foam-covered runway would help minimize friction and sparks if the nose gear collapsed, but taking the time to foam the runway meant burning more fuel they couldn't spare. "We'll go with what we have," she decided aloud. "Attempt normal landing, keep the nose up as long as possible after touchdown, and pray the gear holds." "And if it doesn't?" Maya asked. "Then we'll slide to a stop on the nose." "Not ideal, but survivable." They turned onto downwind, parallel to the runway but traveling in the opposite direction. Catherine continued to fight the increasingly sluggish controls. Rochester Tower, American 2547 downwind for landing. 2547, cleared to land runway 31. Wind 280 at 14 knots. A slight crosswind, another complication, but manageable. Catherine began configuring the aircraft for landing. "Flaps 15, she commanded, moving the lever again. The flap extension created more asymmetry, requiring additional compensation with the ailerons. "Gear is down," she confirmed, though the nose gear indicator remained unlit. "Flight attendants, prepare for landing." They turned onto base leg, perpendicular to the runway, then final approach. The airport expanded before them, emergency vehicles lining the runway with lights flashing. 1,000 feet, Catherine called, her voice steady despite the tremendous pressure. The control column fought her continuously now, the hydraulic assistance barely functioning. Dr. Winters appeared briefly at the cockpit door. "Everyone's secured. The nervous flyer is actually helping others. Even the businessman is being useful. Tell them I'll buy the first round if we survive this," Catherine said, eyes never leaving the instruments. "When," Dr. Winters corrected. "When we survive this." He disappeared back into the cabin as Catherine focused completely on the approach. The runway threshold passed beneath them, and she began the flare, the gentle pitch-up to transition from descent to touchdown. "Here we go," she murmured, to herself, to the aircraft, to whatever fates were listening. "Come on, baby. Just a little longer." The main landing gear kissed the concrete with a puff of blue smoke. The main landing gear struck the runway with precision despite the aircraft's compromised state. Catherine immediately deployed the thrust reverser on the remaining engine and applied maximum braking to the main wheels. The deceleration pressed her forward against her harness. "Maintain back pressure," she muttered to herself, holding the control column firmly back, keeping the nose wheel off the concrete for as long as physics would allow. The longer they delayed nose wheel contact, the slower they'd be moving if it collapsed. The airspeed indicator unwound rapidly, 140 knots. 130, 120. The fire trucks raced alongside them, foam cannons at the ready. Through the periphery of her vision, Catherine saw emergency personnel braced for the worst. Almost there, she told Maya, who gripped the edge of her seat, knuckles white. Get ready to evacuate if the nose gear fails. At 100 knots, the aerodynamic authority of the elevators began to fade. The nose of the aircraft started an inexorable descent toward the runway despite Catherine's continued back pressure on the controls. Come on, she whispered to the aircraft. Just a little longer. 90 knots. 85. The nose wheel hovered just inches above the concrete. The moment of truth arrived at 75 knots when the nose wheel finally touched down. Catherine braced for the jolt of collapse, the scrape of metal on concrete, but instead felt the solid thump of a proper touchdown. The nose gear had held. Nose gear intact, she announced, focusing now entirely on bringing the aircraft to a complete stop. The single thrust reverser created a strong yawing motion that she countered with differential braking and rudder input. The brake temperature indicators climbed rapidly toward the red zone as Catherine demanded maximum performance from the remaining systems. 60 knots. 50. The aircraft continued its deceleration down the runway centerline, Catherine making continuous small corrections to keep it tracking straight despite the asymmetric forces. American. 2547, welcome to Rochester, the tower controller's voice held unmistakable relief. Nice landing. Catherine didn't respond, maintaining complete focus until the aircraft slowed below 30 knots. Only then did she key the radio. Tower, 2547. Request emergency vehicles follow us to the gate. We're showing extremely high brake temperatures. Roger, 2547. Emergency vehicles will escort you to Gate 2. Airport operations standing by. As they taxied slowly toward the terminal, Catherine became aware of a new sound, applause from the cabin. The passengers, realizing they'd survived, had broken into spontaneous cheering. You did it, Maya said, her voice filled with awe. You actually landed this thing. Not over yet, Catherine cautioned, eyeing the rising brake temperature indicators. Those temps keep climbing, we could have a will fire on the taxiway. She increased their taxi speed slightly, hoping the airflow would help cool the brakes. The fire trucks continued to escort them, prepared to douse any flames that might erupt. Through the flight deck window, Catherine could see the terminal approaching, a concrete monument to safety. They were going to make it after all. A sharp bang from beneath the aircraft startled both women. The aircraft lurched slightly to one side. Brake failure, right side, Catherine announced calmly, compensating with the nose wheel steering. Probably overheated and burst a hydraulic line. She coaxed the wounded aircraft the final 100 yards to the gate. As they rolled to a stop, smoke began to rise from the landing gear. Shutdown checklist, Catherine commanded, moving systematically through the procedure to secure the aircraft. With practiced efficiency, she cut fuel to the engine, turned off the electrical systems, and set the parking brake on the remaining functional wheels. Only when every switch was in its proper position did Catherine finally exhale. She'd been holding her breath without realizing it. Evacuate the aircraft, she ordered Maya. Standard procedure, all exits. I'll check the cockpit for any remaining items. As Maya moved to organize the evacuation, Catherine opened the cockpit door to find Dr. Winters waiting with Porter, who was now conscious but still disoriented. We made it, the doctor said simply. So far, Catherine replied. Through the cabin windows, she could see the smoke from the overheated brakes thickening. Get everyone off. I need to check something first. While Maya directed passengers to the emergency exits, Catherine moved quickly to the rear of the aircraft. The damage near the cargo hold access panel confirmed her suspicions, not random decompression damage, but deliberate sabotage. She detached a partially melted component from the panel, evidence for investigators. Tucking it into her pocket, she rejoined the evacuation flow. As Catherine stepped onto the inflatable slide, the last person to leave the aircraft, she heard another loud bang as a tire finally succumbed to the extreme heat. Behind her, emergency personnel rushed forward with fire extinguishers. She slid down to the tarmac, landing on her feet with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it hundreds of times in training. All around her, passengers huddled in groups, some crying, some laughing with relief, all alive. For the first time in 10 years, Catherine Reeves had done what she'd been born to do, fly. And against all odds, she'd done it well. The tarmac transformed into an organized chaos of emergency vehicles, medical personnel, and bewildered passengers. Ambulances lined up to receive the injured, mostly minor injuries from the explosive decompression, though Porter and Williams were wheeled directly to waiting vehicles, still requiring specialized care for their hypoxia exposure. Catherine stood apart from the crowd, the component from the sabotaged panel heavy in her pocket. Her engineering mind had already assessed it as part of the outflow valve control system, deliberately compromised to create catastrophic failure at cruising altitude. "Excuse me, ma'am." A uniformed airport security officer approached. "Are you the pilot who landed the aircraft?" "I was at the controls, yes," Catherine replied. "The actual pilots were incapacitated. We need to secure the scene. FBI's been notified, along with the NTSB. They'll want to speak with you." Catherine hesitated, then reached into her pocket. "I found this in the damage section. It's evidence of tampering." The officer's eyes widened as he accepted the component. "I'll make sure it gets to the investigators." As he walked away, Catherine noticed the first news vans arriving at the perimeter fence. Word of their emergency landing was spreading. Soon cameras would be documenting everything, searching for the story's face. She turned away, pulling her jacket collar higher. The last thing she wanted was publicity. 10 years ago, her name had been dragged through every aviation and defense industry publication as the engineer whose design had killed 3 test pilots. She had no desire to revisit that spotlight, even under better circumstances. "Catherine." Maya rushed toward her, still in her flight attendant uniform though it was now rumpled and stained. Without warning, the young woman threw her arms around Catherine, hugging her tightly. "Thank you," Maya whispered. "You saved us all." Awkwardly, Catherine returned the embrace. Human connection had become unfamiliar territory during her decade of self-imposed isolation. "You were remarkable up there," Catherine said as they separated. "Not many flight attendants could have kept it together like you did." Maya wiped away a tear. "I just did what you told me to do. You did more than that. You showed real courage." Catherine glanced toward the terminal where passengers were being escorted inside. "You should get checked out by medical." "So should you." Catherine shook her head. "I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. Now that the immediate crisis had passed, her body began processing the immense stress it had endured. Her hands, steady as stone throughout the emergency, had developed a slight tremor. The adrenaline crash left her feeling simultaneously exhausted and wired. "Dr. Reeves." She turned to find Richard Thornton, the businessman from Aerospace Defense Systems, approaching. His tailored suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, but his composure remained intact. "Mr. Thornton." That was... He seemed to search for adequate words. "Extraordinary piloting. I've seen military test pilots who couldn't have handled those compound failures. Just doing what needed to be done." His expression turned serious. "About what I mentioned in the cockpit, the X-49 program. I meant what I said. You were never at fault." Catherine felt a familiar anger rising. 10 years too late, Mr. Thornton." "Perhaps not entirely too late." He handed her a business card. "When this is over, call me. There are people who would like to make amends. And opportunities that might interest you." Before she could respond, a commotion near the ambulances caught her attention. The nervous first-time flyer who had been seated behind her was speaking animatedly to a group of passengers, gesturing toward Catherine. "That's her. That's the woman who flew the plane." His earlier terror had transformed into a kind of reverential excitement. Heads turned in her direction. A reporter who had managed to get past the initial security perimeter raised a camera. "Ms. Reeves," he called, "can you tell us how you managed to land the aircraft after both pilots were incapacitated?" Catherine stepped backward, seeking escape, when her phone buzzed again. She'd completely forgotten about the messages from Emma. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her phone. 3 texts, increasing in urgency. Mom, just checking you got your flight okay. Mom? The news is showing a flight emergency from Chicago. Please tell me you're not on that plane. Mom, please answer. I'm really worried. And then a 4th just arrived. OMG, I just saw footage from Rochester. That's you on the tarmac. Are you okay? Call me. Catherine stared at the screen, her vision blurring slightly. After 3 years of strained text messages and unanswered calls, her daughter was finally reaching out, not with recrimination, but with concern. Dr. Winters appeared at her side, gently taking her elbow. Come on, he said. Let's get you inside before the media circus really begins. The airport conference room had been hastily converted into an investigation center. A whiteboard dominated one wall, already covered with questions, diagrams, and timeline entries. Catherine sat at the long table, a cup of untouched coffee cooling before her as 2 NTSB investigators and an FBI agent continued their questioning. And you're certain the component you retrieved shows signs of deliberate tampering? Asked Agent Morales, the FBI representative. Absolutely, Catherine replied. The failure pattern was consistent with a timed, intentional breach. Not metal fatigue, not manufacturing defect. Lead investigator Sarah Chin from the NTSB studied Catherine's credentials again. Your background in these systems is extensive, Dr. Reeves. Though I note you haven't actively designed aircraft systems in 5 years. I still consult, Catherine said. And some knowledge doesn't fade. Chin nodded. Your actions today were remarkable. The preliminary data from the flight recorder confirms multiple cascading failures that should have been catastrophic. They nearly were. The door opened, and a technician entered with a tablet. Preliminary analysis of the component Dr. Reeves recovered, he announced, handing the device to Chen. The investigator's eyes widened slightly as she reviewed the data. Signs of controlled thermal degradation consistent with a timed incendiary device. Small enough to avoid detection, powerful enough to compromise the outflow valve control circuit. She looked up at Catherine. You were right. I've seen this before, Catherine said quietly. The room fell silent. The X-49 incident, Agent Morales stated, not a question. Catherine's jaw tightened. Yes. That was classified, Chin noted. Apparently not as classified as they thought. Catherine leaned forward. 10 years ago, 3 test pilots died when the pressurization system failed on an experimental aircraft I helped design. The official report blamed design failure, my failure. Today, almost the identical failure pattern occurred on a commercial flight. You believe the incidents are connected? Morales asked. I believe someone wanted that aircraft to crash, Catherine replied. And they used a method they knew had worked before. The door opened again, and a man in a rumpled suit entered. Sorry to interrupt, he said, flashing credentials. David Harrison, Department of Defense. Catherine felt her stomach tighten. The Pentagon had arrived. We need to discuss the cargo manifest, Harrison said without preamble. Specifically, the diplomatic pouch in transit to Seattle. What was in it? Catherine asked directly. Harrison hesitated. Classified materials related to next-generation hypersonic aircraft designs. Designs like the X-49, Catherine stated flatly. The DoD representative's surprise was evident. How did you? Because I helped create those designs, Mr. Harrison. Before my career was destroyed by a sabotage incident that was covered up as my failure. The tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. Harrison cleared his throat. Dr. Reeves, that situation was complicated. 3 pilots dead. My reputation destroyed. My marriage ended. My relationship with my daughter shattered. Catherine's voice remained steady despite the emotion behind her words. Seems pretty straightforward to me. Before Harrison could respond, Catherine's phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen. Mom, I'm at the Minneapolis airport. Taking a shuttle to Rochester. Please tell me where you are. Catherine stared at the message in disbelief. Emma was coming here? After 3 years of strained communication and missed connections? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Maya stood in the doorway, looking exhausted but determined. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said. "Captain Porter is asking to speak with Dr. Reeves. He's in the medical center downstairs." Chen nodded. "We could use a break anyway. Dr. Reeves, we'll continue this discussion in 30 minutes. As Catherine rose to follow Maya, Harrison stepped forward. "Dr. Reeves, when you return, I'd like to discuss a proposal from the department." "I'm not interested in government proposals, Mr. Harrison." "You might be interested in this one," he replied. "It involves clearing your name. Officially and publicly." Catherine paused at the door. 10 years too late. "Perhaps," Harrison acknowledged. "But better late than never." The medical center occupied a small wing of the airport terminal. Captain Porter was sitting up in bed, an oxygen cannula in his nose, but his eyes were clear and alert. "Dr. Reeves," he said as she entered, "I understand I owe you my life and the lives of everyone on my aircraft." "I just did what needed doing, Captain." Porter shook his head. "From what I've been told, you did the impossible. Multiple system failures, engine fire, stuck slat, partial hydraulics. Most test pilots in simulators couldn't have managed that combination." Catherine shrugged uncomfortably. "I had good motivation. 211 people depending on me." "Including yourself," Porter noted. A shadow crossed Catherine's face. "To be honest, Captain, my survival wasn't my primary concern." Porter studied her face. "The X-49 program," he said quietly. "I remember the incident. You were the engineer who supposedly killed 3 test pilots through negligence," Catherine finished. "Yes, that was me. And now you've saved 3 times that many lives," Porter said. "Seems like the scales have balanced." Catherine looked away. "Not to me." The conference room had grown more crowded when Catherine returned. Richard Thornton from Aerospace Defense Systems had been added to the investigation team, along with 2 additional Pentagon officials. On the whiteboard, someone had pinned an old newspaper clipping, "Experimental Aircraft Crash Claims 3, Design Flaws Cited." Catherine stared at the headline, memories flooding back. The Black Memorial Service. The internal investigation. The quiet suggestion that she resign rather than face formal proceedings. The first bottle of whiskey, purchased on the way home after clearing out her office. "Dr. Reeves," Agent Morales began, "we've been reviewing the classified files on the X-49 incident while you were gone." "And?" Catherine asked, taking her seat. "And it appears you were right," Harrison from the DoD admitted. Subsequent investigation, classified at the highest levels, confirmed evidence of sabotage. The official report was modified for national security reasons. "You mean I was scapegoated?" Catherine said flatly. "It was a complicated time," one of the new Pentagon officials interjected. "The program had Chinese interest. Admitting sabotage would have exposed vulnerabilities in our security protocols. So 3 pilots died and I took the fall." Catherine's voice remained controlled, but her eyes burned with a decade of suppressed anger. "Do you have any idea what that did to me? To my family?" Thornton leaned forward. "That's why I'm here, Dr. Reeves. My company took over the X-49 technology 5 years ago. When we reviewed the complete files, several of us fought to have your name cleared." "As I said before," Catherine replied, "it's 10 years too late." "Perhaps not entirely," Harrison said, sliding a folder across the table. "This is the unredacted investigation report. It identifies the likely saboteur, a Chinese intelligence asset who infiltrated the contractor team." Catherine opened the folder, her breath catching as she saw a familiar face in the attached photograph. "Martin Chin. He was on my design team. And presumed dead in a boating accident 6 months after the X-49 incident," Agent Morales added. "Except we now believe he was extracted by his handlers." Catherine stared at the photo. Chen had been brilliant, dedicated, or so she'd thought. They'd worked side by side for 2 years developing the pressurization system. "We've been tracking him for years," Harrison continued. "Nothing concrete until today. The sabotage signature on your flight matches his previous work exactly." You're saying Chin is still alive? And he sabotaged Flight 2547? Catherine asked, pieces falling into place. We believe so, Morales confirmed. And we think we know why. The diplomatic pouch contained the complete X-49 flight data and your original designs, the evidence that would exonerate you. It was being transported to Seattle for a classified defense contractor meeting. Chen wanted to destroy the evidence, Catherine realized. Along with me. You weren't supposed to be on that flight, Harrison said. Your name appeared on the manifest only 24 hours before departure. We believe Chen had already placed the device, then discovered you were a passenger, a bonus from his perspective. The revelation hit Catherine like a physical blow. For 10 years, she'd lived with the belief that her design had killed 3 good men, that their deaths were her responsibility. The truth was both liberating and devastating. A commotion outside the conference room interrupted her thoughts. Through the glass partition, Catherine saw a young woman arguing with airport security, dark hair, determined expression, her own stubborn chin. Emma, she whispered. As if hearing her mother's voice, Emma looked up, their eyes meeting through the glass. For a moment, neither moved. Then Emma pushed past the security officer and rushed into the room. Mom! Catherine stood just in time to receive her daughter's fierce embrace. Emma was trembling, her medical school composure cracked by fear and relief. You're okay, Emma kept saying. I saw the news. The plane. They said a passenger landed it. Then I saw you on the tarmac and... I'm okay, Catherine assured her, holding her daughter for the first time in 3 years. I'm okay. Emma pulled back, wiping tears. You flew the plane? After all this time? I didn't have much choice. Emma's gaze traveled around the room, taking in the investigators, the evidence boards, the classified folders. What's going on here? Catherine hesitated, looking to Agent Morales, who gave a slight nod. They're investigating the emergency, Catherine explained carefully. And something that happened a long time ago. Something I never told you about. The real reason you stopped flying, Emma said, surprising her mother. Dad told me there was more to it than you said, that you blamed yourself for something terrible. Catherine glanced at the newspaper clipping on the board. I did. For 10 years I did. And now? Catherine took a deep breath. Now I'm learning that the ghosts I've been running from might not have been mine to carry after all. 3 days later, Catherine stood at a podium in a Washington, D.C. hearing room, her testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee concluding. The classified nature of the proceedings meant no cameras were present, but the weight of the moment pressed upon her nonetheless. In summary, gentlemen, ladies, she finished, the sabotage technique used on Flight 2547 matches precisely the method employed on the X-49 prototype 10 years ago. The evidence is irrefutable. Senator Hargrove, the committee chair, leaned forward. Dr. Reeves, your country owes you an apology that is long overdue. Your design was not at fault in the X-49 tragedy, and your extraordinary actions aboard Flight 2547 saved hundreds of lives. Catherine nodded, her expression composed despite the emotions churning beneath. Thank you, Senator. But 3 good pilots still died on my watch. That responsibility doesn't simply vanish. No, the senator acknowledged, but it can be properly placed. As of this morning, Martin Chin has been located in Vancouver. Canadian authorities are cooperating fully with his extraction. A ripple of surprise passed through the room. Catherine felt a complex wave of emotions, relief, vindication, and a strange emptiness where her anger had lived for so long. As she gathered her notes, Harrison approached from the DOD table. He's being brought in alive, he said quietly. You'll have your chance to face him. I'm not sure that's what I want, Catherine admitted. What do you want, Dr. Reeves? She considered the question. For 10 years, she'd wanted absolution, vindication, her name cleared. Now that it was happening, she found the reality less satisfying than imagined. Peace, she finally answered. For me, for the families of those pilots. Harrison nodded. The official record has been amended. A public statement will be released this afternoon clearing your name completely. Outside the hearing room, Emma waited, a remarkable sight in her white medical coat. She'd returned to Seattle only long enough to attend her graduation ceremony before flying to Washington to support her mother. "How did it go?" Emma asked as they walked together down the marble hallway. "They're bringing him in," Catherine replied. "Chen, the man responsible for everything." Emma took her mother's hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. "Will that help? Seeing him face justice?" "I don't know," Catherine admitted. "But it's a start." They exited the building into bright spring sunshine. A black sedan waited at the curb, arranged by Harrison to bypass the press that had gathered at the main entrance. News of Catherine's heroism had spread worldwide, alongside rumors of the classified hearing taking place. "Dr. Reeves." They turned to find Captain Porter approaching, now fully recovered from his ordeal. Beside him stood First Officer Williams, still showing signs of fatigue but upright and alert. "Captain," Catherine greeted them. "Good to see you both on your feet." "We wanted to thank you in person," Porter said, extending his hand. "What you did, there aren't adequate words." Catherine shook his hand firmly. "I'm glad I was there to help." "Help?" Williams said with a short laugh. "You saved everyone on that aircraft. The simulator trials proved it. They put our best test pilots through the same failure sequence. None of them managed to land successfully." Catherine's expression softened. Sometimes experience counts for more than currency. As they spoke, Maya approached from across the plaza, dressed in civilian clothes but immediately recognizable. "Maya," Catherine greeted her with genuine warmth. "What brings you to Washington?" The young woman smiled. "You actually. And this." She held up an official-looking letter. "I've been accepted to flight school. The airline fast-tracked my application after what happened." "That's wonderful," Catherine said sincerely. "You'll make an excellent pilot. I had an extraordinary teacher, even if only for a few hours." Maya hesitated, then asked, Would you be willing to give me some advice as I go through training?" Before Catherine could respond, Richard Thornton appeared from a side entrance, approaching their growing group. "Dr. Reeves, a moment?" he requested. When they stepped aside, he continued, "Aerospace Defense Systems would like to offer you a position. Director of Flight Safety, reporting directly to the board. Your experience is invaluable, and your vindication is now complete." Catherine glanced back at Emma, who had engaged in conversation with Maya and the pilots. For the first time in years, her daughter's face showed something other than disappointment when looking at her mother. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Thornton," Catherine said, "but I'm considering a different direction." "May I ask what?" Catherine's gaze drifted upward, to the blue sky above. For 10 years, she'd kept her eyes firmly on the ground, afraid to look up at what she'd lost. "I think it might be time to start flying again," she said quietly. "Actually flying." Thornton smiled. "Test division could certainly use someone with your skills." "Perhaps," Catherine agreed. "But first, I have some personal matters to attend to. A relationship to rebuild." Her eyes returned to Emma, the daughter who had once watched with pride as her mother flew magnificent machines across the sky, before everything fell apart. "Rebuilding is what engineers do best," Thornton observed. 6 months later, sunshine bathed the University of Washington's outdoor graduation ceremony in golden light. Catherine sat in the faculty section, her newly issued credentials as a visiting professor of aerospace engineering hanging around her neck. As Emma crossed the stage to receive her medical degree, Catherine's applause was perhaps the loudest among the thousands present. Afterward, Catherine found herself adjusting Emma's cap, straightening it with the same precision she once applied to aircraft control surfaces. "Mom, it's fine," Emma laughed, but she didn't pull away. "Humor me," Catherine replied. "It's not every day my daughter becomes a doctor." They walked together across the campus, their relationship transformed from the fragile reconciliation of 6 months ago into something new, not the same as before the tragedy, but perhaps stronger for having been broken and mended. "Have you heard from Maya?" Emma asked as they reached the parking area. "She's halfway through flight school," Catherine said with unmistakable pride. "Top of her class. Like teacher, like student." Catherine smiled. "She has natural talent. I just pointed her in the right direction. And Captain Porter? Back flying commercial routes. He still calls occasionally, usually with technical questions that I suspect he already knows the answers to. Emma gave her mother a knowing look. He's not the only one who's found excuses to stay in touch. I don't know what you mean, Catherine demurred, though the slight color in her cheeks suggested otherwise. Their conversation paused as they approached a sleek rental car. Catherine's hesitation was brief but noticeable. We could take an Uber instead, Emma offered, recognizing her mother's discomfort. No, Catherine said firmly. I've been driving again for months. This is no different. It was different, not because of the vehicle, but because of their destination. Emma had arranged a surprise that she'd been planning for weeks, one that would test Catherine's newfound courage. They drove north from Seattle, following signs toward Arlington Municipal Airport. Catherine noticed the route but said nothing, her hands steady on the wheel despite her inner tension. When they pulled into the small airport's parking lot, Emma finally revealed her surprise. I've arranged a flight for us. Catherine stared at the general aviation terminal. A flight? With an instructor, Emma clarified. A discovery flight, they call it. For potential students. Emma, I'm not sure. Mom, Emma interrupted gently, you've been talking about returning to the cockpit for months. But each time you get close, you find a reason to delay. The visiting professorship, the consulting work, the investigation. Those were important, Catherine protested. They were excuses, Emma countered. Safe excuses. Catherine fell silent, recognizing the truth in her daughter's words. You saved hundreds of lives that day, Emma continued. Including your. But you're still punishing yourself for deaths that weren't your fault. It's not that simple. It never is, Emma agreed. But at some point, you have to decide whether you're going to let the past define your future. They sat in silence for a moment, the small airport buzzing with activity around them. Weekend pilots, flight students, aircraft being rolled from hangars into sunshine. When did you become so wise? Catherine finally asked. I had a good teacher, Emma replied. A stubborn one who never gave up even when she thought she had. Inside the terminal, they were greeted by a flight instructor in his 60s, a contemporary of Catherine's with weathered skin and bright, knowing eyes. Dr. Reeves, he said, extending his hand. I've been following your story. It's an honor to fly with you today. I'm not sure how much flying I'll be doing, Catherine hedged. We'll see, he replied with a wink to Emma. I've got a Cessna 172 warmed up and ready. Nothing fancy like you're used to, but she's a sweet little bird. As they walked onto the tarmac, Catherine's steps slowed. The small aircraft waiting on the apron seemed simultaneously inviting and terrifying, a gateway back to a world she'd abandoned, a test of whether she could truly forgive herself. Emma squeezed her mother's hand. You don't have to do this today. Catherine took a deep breath of aviation-scented air, fuel, oil, sun-warmed metal. Scents that had once been as familiar as her own heartbeat. Yes, she said quietly. I do. The pre-flight check was muscle memory, her hands moving over the aircraft with practiced efficiency. The instructor watched with professional respect, recognizing that despite the years away, Catherine's expertise remained intact. As they settled into the cockpit, Catherine in the left seat, Emma behind her, the instructor offered headsets. Would you like to do the honors? He asked, gesturing to the starter. Catherine's hand hovered over the key, then turned to Emma. This is because of you, you know. I wouldn't be here without you. Emma smiled. We helped each other find our way back. Catherine nodded, then turned the key. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. The vibration traveled through the airframe and into her body, a sensation both foreign and intimately familiar. As they taxied toward the runway, Catherine felt something she hadn't experienced in a decade, joy in flight. Pure, simple joy. With the aircraft poised at the threshold, the instructor nodded. Whenever you're ready. Catherine advanced the throttle, feeling the aircraft surge forward. As the wheels left the earth, she turned briefly to Emma. Watch and learn, she said with a smile, banking into clear blue sky.